What's your story? Whether you're a client or an independent financial advisor, we know you face many important decisions that can affect your and your clients' long-term financial success. Welcome to the WIN Podcast, What's Important Now with Corey Heimensen, accredited investment fiduciary and president of Heimensen Wealth Advisors. In this podcast, Corey helps you identify your goals and objectives through financial education and comprehensive planning, while inspiring you to make better behavioral decisions in your personal finance. With a twist on pop culture and current events, join us as we explore growth and protection strategies for individuals, advisors, and their businesses. Come and discover what's important to you now.
Hello and welcome to the WIN Podcast with Corey Heimensen. Corey, how are you, man?
Eric, how are you doing today? I'm good.
I am doing fantastic. You sent me some notes ahead of time, and I was just some nostalgia just kind of creeped into my brain, and I loved it.
Well, earlier this summer there was a lot of talk on debt ceiling and all this stuff, and in my head I instantly go back to, geez, we've had this conversation 78 times before, because that's how many times they've solved this. So I mean, history repeats itself essentially. Wow. But sometimes people fail to forget that. So I'm going back in time today. Yeah,
seriously. And you started right off with a stat that slapped me in the face. 78 times they've done this debt ceiling dance?
Yeah. It's been essentially, I hate to say the word solved, but resolved, kicked down the road, and reset to a higher debt limit level 78 times. And I think that's since World War II.
Wow.
So there, things like that, I get lots of client calls and questions, and people are panicked because the media really presses on it. But it's like, this is very common. And until they put a permanent solution in place, you're going to have this about every other year, and it gets solved because we're the United States, we're going to pay our bills. That's how simple this all is.
Yeah. Well, I think people's fear comes from knowing who the people are that are trying to solve this.
Yeah, that's fair.
The media does play it up, like you said, but yeah. All right. Enough of that debt ceiling stuff.
Yeah, that was really not even on our agenda of things to talk about. I just threw a warning shot out there.
Well, yeah, but that's what triggered this podcast to begin with, because you're talking about sudden wealth, and the example that you sent me that really made me, number one, feel a little older than maybe I am, maybe exactly how old I am, but was the Beverly Hillbillies. And I loved that show when I was a kid, and immediately the song, came to mind. And I won't sing it, but
right, there you go. So yeah, today we're titling this thing the Clampett Connection.
Okay.
And so for any of you youngsters out there, the Beverly Hillbillies was a show back in 1962 is when it came out. So yeah, I felt a little aged as well when I read that year. I didn't realize it was that long ago. But yeah. I'm assuming a lot of people are going to know what we're talking about here, but I'll give a little crash course. And essentially what this is a family that lived out in the sticks of, I don't know if it was Kentucky or Tennessee or somewhere like that, but basically they shoot a gun, they strike the ground, and oil starts bubbling out. So they're suddenly rich.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you say it like that, it's like, people made a show, but I mean, point of all this family was suddenly in over their head, essentially, with all this wealth. And actually, in prepping for this, I read somewhere that it was estimated, I don't know if they ever said it on the show, but their net worth suddenly became $92 million. Back in 1962, that was a fair pile of coin at the time.
Today's dollar, that's got to be close to $1 billion, right?
Yeah, there you go. And so this family, the father, Granny, who was his mother, and then there was a daughter, and Jethro Bodine was the not so sharp nephew. They put together kind of a fun cast of characters, but they just up and moved to Beverly Hills. I don't really recall if it was just because they thought they had to, because they had money.
Well,
or they
according to the song, the folks there said, "Move away from there."
Oh, yeah.
told Jed, "Move away from there," wherever that was, whatever redneck location he was in.
Yeah,
it was in the song. They told him, "Move away from there." In Beverly Hills is where you ought to be. right? So he loaded up the family and moved to, anyway, that's how I remember it. And I remember they moved the family and they put like Granny in a rocking chair on the top of the truck or something rather. I mean, it was just this, this beater of a truck that had all their worldly possessions, which wasn't much because they were poor, right? And they drove this sucker from wherever they were at all the way to Beverly Hills. And of course, we know that, if anybody did that today, it would be the same thing where all the neighbors are looking out their windows going, oh, dear God, who are these people? And who is that old woman strapped to the top of a truck?
Wait. See, you must be able to just glance at me with this smirk on my face and know where my head's going, because you're talking about Granny strapped to the top of a vehicle. And I'm suddenly thinking of that vacation movie where Grandma died and it was raining and they didn't want to ride in the car. So they strapped her deceased body to the top of the station wagon.
Let's make it clear. Granny in this show was not dead on top of the truck. She was quite alive. And I believe she had her shotgun with her. Because in most of every show, she had a double-barreled shotgun with her, which is fantastic because she was the protector of both house and virtue, I believe.
There you go.
Oh, my.
And so the show was entertaining because they were just out of their element, essentially.
And their personalities were amazing, right?
Yeah, and so you got snobby neighbors all of a sudden, and you know what I mean? There's some real life stuff going on here, too. If you or I suddenly moved to a glitzy part of town, there might be some of those exact same things. I don't know. But
I mean, I didn't even move to a rich neighborhood, and I had neighbors like that. My son was working on his car in the front of in the driveway. He was working on his car in our driveway. And they came over and they were complaining. He shouldn't have the hood up of his car. It makes the neighborhood look at. He's out there for 30 minutes. Quit looking to find something that you don't like. Yeah, it happens to everybody. But anyway, yeah. It would have been nice to have $92 million at that point. I could build a big wall or a fence.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway,
there you go. So where my mind goes is, let's dive deeper, into the whole thing. And so sudden wealth, is what comes to my mind. And, if we ran an average podcast, we would talk about lottery winners, because that's what an average podcaster would do. Well, Jesus, we're not going to do that, right? Because how many of us or how many listeners out there are truly going to fall into that camp, of winning lottery? I mean, we understand it's suddenly a huge pile of money dumped in your lap and bad things can potentially happen. But where I'd rather go with this is something more pertinent to everybody, and that's inheritance. I'm not saying everybody's going to get an inheritance, but statistically, a lot of people in the United States get some kind of an inheritance at some point, whether it's from mom or dad, grandpa, grandma, aunt, uncle, whomever, and so I'd rather focus there and try to connect all this because it just makes sense to me, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I pulled some stats here, and it indicates to me, this is from the New York Times, and it says that most inheritances average $50,000. And, in today's world anymore, I mean, that's not life-changing money. That's a average new car, basically. But, and so about half of all inheritances are 50 or less, essentially, and that's about where a lot of them are. And 30% range from 50,000 to $250,000, 250,000. So I mean that means there's only 20% of the time is it something larger than $250,000. But point being, what happens when somebody gets newfound wealth like this? The answer is a lot of them spend it. So, I'm throwing a lot of stats here, but most, and if we look at certain categories of age-banded people, baby boomers, if they inherit $100,000 or less, typically spend it all within 1 year.
Oh, geez.
And I get it because, I shouldn't say I get it. I understand it because it's so easy that it's in your lap and suddenly you think of all these wants. They're not needs. These people are not going out and buying groceries and blowing the inheritance. They're buying stuff they wanted for a long time or things that they think will make them happy. What's that? A boat, a bigger boat, fancy cars, fancy jewelry, all that stuff. And, we've talked about that too. Stuff generally doesn't give you long-term happiness. It's experiences, or it's the people around you, you know?
Yeah.
And so it just comes back to having an understanding, or, I even suggest to clients, if they inherit, take some time, just relax for a while. Let's put it in a T-bill and earn 4 or 5% interest for a short period of time and just relax, and think about things before you suddenly just go off the deep end and blow it all.
Yeah.
Because
Corey, out of curiosity, I don't know if you saw any of the research or if it even showed any research, but do they happen to say how many of those folks paid off debts with that money? Because I think that would be another, I say temptation in air quotes because it's not necessarily a temptation, but how many people were using it just to pay off their own current debt? And maybe some of them made, we can't dive too deep into whether it was a mistake or not, but maybe they paid off a mortgage that they had their mortgage at 3%, and they could have done more if they had taken $150,000 or $200,000 and invested it in different ways. But since they didn't speak to anybody, they just said, you know what, I'm just going to pay off everything I possibly can.
Right. In reading through this study, there's no specific reference to that.
Yeah.
But what it does say is that kind of a best case scenario from inheritance is that a lot of people in their mind think they should save half of it. So, and it actually, saving half could be using half to pay down debt.
Or using half to blow it in Vegas. You're right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, true.
Because so the other half, they basically spend it. A fair amount actually do donate. I find that interesting that some people, have a focus in their life of faith, and they, know the tithing story of 10% of what they have, essentially. And so, that's where I see people sometimes, they will take 10% and gift it. Or I shouldn't say gift, donate it to a charitable cause or a church or something. And I find that interesting because those are people that probably don't give 10% of their other normal income in that way. I don't want to say it's a guilt thing, but I think it's a way to maybe play catch up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah.
And I also run, I think I've talked about this before too. Sometimes I see clients, and if they inherit money, they're afraid to blow it, almost on the opposite extreme. You know what I mean? They're afraid to invest it. They're afraid to do almost anything other than burying it in a box, because they feel like that's the last tangible thing that came from a loved one, and they don't want to lose it. They don't want to, run into an issue. And so my answer to that situation is, wouldn't that long lost relative want you to be productive? Wouldn't they want you to enjoy the money or to do something good with it? And I think that helps frame the mindset, and or maybe get some closure. I'm not saying I'm a therapist here, but sometimes people just need to talk through things, think through things, and you get better outcomes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Now, you said wouldn't long lost relative, want you to do, something, whatever with it. And I think about, I'm not going to get a huge inheritance, right? I'm just going to be very, very straightforward and honest. My parents are both alive. They're on a fixed income. They have done well for themselves. They do not need anything, which is fantastic. But it's not like they've got a bunch of stuff socked away, and there's not these large life insurance policies hanging out there. But whatever I get, I can see I'd probably be in that 50 or less category is what I'm saying. I could see myself, if let's say it was 50, just to make easy math, I could see myself thinking, what would my dad want me to do with this? I'd want to make him proud with the decisions that I make, right? So I could see that with somebody else, when they get an inheritance of any size thing. I don't want to let this person down by using this money to A, B, and C. So I'm just going to sit on it, or I'm just going to wait and make a decision later. And maybe that decision doesn't come for quite a long time, and they could have been doing many things with that, whether it is paying off debt or investing it in good ways. But yet I'm just going to leave it in that bank account and just let it sit there, because I just don't want to make the wrong decision. So I could totally see that.
Right. And everything in life is about being productive, I believe. Whether that's you or I getting out of bed and doing something productive, whether it's a job or charitable work or taking a grandkid fishing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So why shouldn't our assets be productive as well?
Yeah.
So there you go. There's my takeaway. I don't know.
No, I love that. I think that's good.
And so the next thing, I tie into the Beverly Hillbillies situation is something they call lifestyle inflation. And a lot of people probably have never even used these two words together. But what is it? It's basically the point of, if I suddenly make more money, I kind of like nicer things. Is maybe my first interpretation of how to describe that. So if I'm a college student and I'm skimping by eating ramen noodles and macaroni and cheese and sharing a small crowded apartment in a city with 2 or 3 other people, suddenly I graduate, I get a job, and now I've actually got steady paychecks. I'm going to go out and get my own apartment, right?
Yep.
It's going to cost 3 times what the one was that I was dividing or sharing with people, but I want my own apartment. And then from there, eventually you get more money or get another raise and you want to move to a house. I mean, and it's even going out to eat. It's what you drink. It's what you eat. It's what you wear, the watches you buy, the shoes you wear. I mean, I can go as fast as I want and as long as I want. It's all stuff.
Yeah.
And once you have something that you think is nicer or cooler than the last thing that did that job of that product, it's hard to go backwards, right? And maybe cars. Maybe cars would be a great example of that, because people don't want to go backwards and drive a, for lack of a professional term, a crappier pickup truck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. No, it's 100%. Funny thing is that I remember in the show, right, going back to the Clampetts, I remember that I can't remember the banker's name. It slips my mind. I don't remember the show that well, apparently. But I remember the banker was always trying to encourage them to live the lifestyle of Beverly Hills. You don't have to live the old way, because in many of the shows, whether it was Jethro or Granny, they'd be walking through the house with like a sack full of squirrels that they shot out of the trees in the Beverly Hills neighborhood, right? They're still trying to shoot their dinner. They're like, right. and the people around them are like, stop doing that. You can do whatever. And so I think they spent lavishly on a couple different things because they were told to do so. And they're just like, I was told to do this, but they were still trying to live that old lifestyle. And there was definitely some conflict there. Right. And so I could see that just not necessarily going after squirrels, but people still trying to live that old lifestyle while also trying to adapt a new one and not knowing how to deal with it. Like, Corey, this is taking me right back. When I was a kid, I asked my dad, my favorite car when I was a kid was a Ferrari Testarossa. And I said, Dad, what would happen if somebody just gave you a Ferrari Testarossa? What would you do? It used to make me so mad. He'd go, I'd sell it. Like, what? No, they gave you a Ferrari Testarossa. He goes, I'd sell it and buy a minivan. Oh, man. But he said minivan just to make me mad, because he knew that would make me mad. But he'd probably buy a truck, right? He'd buy a pickup truck, and he wouldn't buy a new one. And it used to drive me crazy, right? And then I had that exact same conversation with my son, because he'd asked, and it wasn't a Ferrari Testarossa, but he was probably 13, 14. He's like, Dad, what would you do if somebody gave you this Lamborghini Diablo or whatever the Lamborghini he was pining over? I was like, ooh, I'd sell it. Like, what? He was just freaking out. He's like, you can't sell it. I was like, son, I wouldn't be able to afford the insurance on that car. Right. It's the things that we don't think about, right? Somebody, they're a lottery winner, they go out and buy, or they get a big inheritance. They go out and buy this fancy car that now costs them 4 or 5 times their insurance on a monthly basis that they used to. So not only did that money leave their account, now they have higher bills, right? And it's just, it's crazy. So, I mean, there's so many different things to think about. I can't believe I had that flashback. Yeah.
Well, in your vehicle story, sends me off on one of my famous tangents, and I'm going to sort of do a little name dropping, even though I've never met the guy. But anyway, a buddy of mine from Omaha, Nebraska, has a buddy who works in an automotive shop. And so this is quite a few years ago, but Warren Buffett, who I've never met, pulls in there with his, I believe it was a Ford Bronco, supposedly, according to the story. I don't know. But seats are all torn up inside, and the air conditioner hadn't been working for like 9 months. And he thought it was finally time to get the air conditioner fixed.
Yeah.
This is one of the richest people on the planet, driving around in a vehicle that probably nobody would even steal.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
Just to your point of, he could have a Ferrari or Lamborghini and whatever, don't need it.
Yeah.
So it's just where your values are, I guess, or what you enjoy. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the banker for the Hillbillies. The thing that always came to my mind is he just wanted their assets in the bank.
Yep.
You know what I mean? He was bending over backwards for them, or trying to do whatever he could to stay on their good side because he wanted that money in his bank so he could lend it out and make even more money.
Mm-hmm.
He was an imaginary banker on TV that acts just like real bankers.
Yes.
Ooh, that was kind of sharp, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well,
but that's what banks do. I'm not bashing on banks. They're supposed to make money.
Yeah. They just make money a different way. Using your money. Okay. All right. We'll leave them alone now.
So we're going a lot of directions. I get this here, but I mean, if we talk about millionaires, so the Clampett family suddenly has $92 million, so then you start thinking, well, what's it take to be a millionaire in our country anymore? And sometimes politicians talk about the 1%ers, the top 1% of everybody. To be a 1%er based on assets, according to my research here, is that you have to have a net worth of $11 million. And only 3% of millionaires received an inheritance of $1 million or more. So I mean, the suggestion that, Joe or whatever's name over there is a millionaire because they inherited it, highly unlikely. Most millionaires didn't necessarily even earn a lot. They just didn't spend.
Mm-hmm.
Or they didn't have children. Sometimes, that's a great saving mechanism.
Yeah, that's the key right there.
Well, I mean, we joke, but I mean, it's a spending thing. If you save more than you spend and you invest it and you leave it alone and you're patient, you're going to accumulate a fair amount of wealth.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And so, if we go back to the Hillbillies, I keep going back to that. It's a phrase I haven't used ever in my life. But anyway, if you don't have the knowledge for a situation, then you lean on people in your circle. You know what I mean? And maybe it's not the banker who just wants your assets in their bank. It's maybe a financial advisor, and I'm not saying I should be the end all for everybody in the country, but, and you mentioned it too. Sometimes people don't think about the after effects of buying that fancy car. Now the insurance costs more. Sometimes people inherit money and they don't understand the tax consequences, or they don't understand the ability to stretch out withdrawals of a certain type of an inheritance to spread the taxes over time or to stay in certain tax brackets. We can go on and on, but it's like, if you don't know something, don't be a pretender. Get help to coach you.
Yeah. Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, again, we don't know what we don't know. And you hear people say it all the time. Oh, the rich, they always have these loopholes and blah, blah, blah. They don't pay their fair share in taxes. The loopholes that people are talking about are written into the tax code. They're completely legal, right? For the most part. Yep. They're completely legal. They're just utilizing the rules that are put in place for the game that they're playing. And they're playing at a higher level than myself. I'm not wealthy by any means, but they're just playing at a higher level, and mainly because they spend the money to hire a professional that knows the code or the rules to the game and takes advantage of them. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you're playing within the parameters of the game, in my opinion, at least.
You are spot on. I have clients or investors, that might have smaller nest eggs of investments. And sometimes they'll say, gee, it doesn't seem like I should have to pay so much for management fees of an advisor. And I'll say to them, you get what you pay for. Essentially, I mean, I say it in a nicer way than that, but I mean, to your point, the richest people in our country, I will guarantee you, every one of them has a professional team of advisors from a tax standpoint, from an investment standpoint, from a legal standpoint. They understand the value of what they're paying for. And that's how you get ahead. The wealthy are wealthy for a reason, and they're good at keeping wealth, generally.
Yeah. But that's one of the things that you've spoken about on this podcast before, is that you are kind of like the quarterback of a team that you work with your your clients, right? Because you have self-professed that you are not like you said, you're not the end all be all for each person. There are things that you don't do. And if I'm not mistaken, you're not a licensed attorney.
Correct.
Yeah. So, but you have a deep bench of attorneys that fit the needs of the clients that you work with. So whether that's estate planning, whatever it is, you have a team in place that you can say, hey, here's what I believe you need in your scenario, in your situation, whether they're a business owner, whether they've got a large family they want to take care of, whatever it is, they're going to need more than just you. And you have all those connections. You have that network that you take advantage of and say, hey, here's some folks I'd like to introduce you to. These are the folks that can get this done, essentially building the team for them, just like you were speaking about.
Absolutely. I'm not a licensed attorney. I'm not a licensed CPA doing taxes, but I sure as hell know the signs for any of these industries of when somebody needs help or assistance in one of those categories. The New York Jets, they go out and they pay $60 million, whatever the number is, to Aaron Rodgers as quarterback. I'll guarantee you he's not kicking field goals. You know what I mean? You've got to have other members of the team to do their role to hopefully have success. And that's not just the Jets. I mean, that's any athletics event, so spot on. You're spot on, Eric, as always.
Oh, thank you. But again, it's just because we've had so many podcasts together. I mean,
there you go.
Yeah. So what else do we need to learn about this sudden wealth stuff? Because I mean, you've really spoken about some of the psychological things about sudden wealth and what that could look like. And you've spoken about some mistakes that folks have made. What else have you got?
Yeah. I think it's important that if a person's in a situation or a family's in a situation where it appears they have enough assets or they have enough cash flow to assist them in doing whatever they want to do for the rest of their life, then I think it's time to expand the conversation. And a lot of people don't think of this, but to have someone like me expand the conversation where maybe they think about philanthropy or gifting, or creating a system for generational wealth. That as an advisor, when I'm looking someone in the eye across the table or the desk, I'm looking out for their best interests. It's all about them right there, sitting there. And then when we know that that's under control from a very, very high probability standpoint, then we look at what's next. How do we feather, some of this extra, because we've done such a great job of creating the cash flow machine? Okay, we've got extra. So now what do we do with that? Do we set up a way to pass it to the next generation? Do we start gifting to charity today or gifting to family today so that you can see this money at work? Or do we set up things with those attorneys on trusts and things like that to be tax smart for the future? Because sometimes people don't think about doing productive things with their money in a gifting standpoint while they're still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really cool thing to talk about. And we do a lot of these in family meetings for clients too, that let's just lay it out on the table. Nobody wants to talk about death, but you know what? It's something that's probably needing to be talked about because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Let's have a plan. Let's all look each other in the eye and know that we're going to go to Thanksgiving next year and 10 years after that, after mom and dad are gone or whomever in the family tree is gone, because we all still get along.
Yeah.
I don't want to, money is the root of all evil. I mean, that's an old line, right? And I don't necessarily believe that, but boy, I see a lot of struggles and strife after some of the people on the higher end of the family tree are not around anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you said something that I actually wrote down because it struck me and I like it. Creating a system for generational wealth. I'm just quoting you there because that's something that you've spoken about on previous podcasts again. And again, it flashed right in my mind with this whole Clampett story. Jed was very kind-hearted, pretty smart, and again, leaned on the banker a bit, so on and so forth. But Jethro was dumb as a stump. Let's just be honest. He was kind of more of a box of hammers kind of guy. And if you look at what would have happened if he, and this never addressed in the show, but if Granny's gone and then Jed passes away, who gets the money? If it's the two kids, whether he was a cousin or nephew or whoever he was, if it's Jed and I can't remember her name, if it's those two, she was kind of a ditz too. I mean, she was kind of a bubblehead.
Ellie.
From what I remember, Ellie Mae. That's right.
Ellie Mae.
Yep, Ellie Mae. That's right when you said Ellie Mae popped into my head. So those two are not the brightest bulbs in the box, right? So if they didn't put in protections, and I think that that's what a lot of family members fail to do as well, is they're like, I want to gift my children this, but they do it in ways that are detrimental to their kids or their grandkids. And you've spoken about it before, so I don't want to rehash it, but I think that is a wonderful definition of creating a system for generational wealth, because if you don't have a system in place, if you don't have something in place that you've worked out with the professionals in your arena, it could go very badly, for the next generation.
Yeah. And I'm thinking there's a stretch of road about 30 miles west of my office, and there's a corner where you go around, and every time I go around it, I think, damn, there should be a guardrail right there, because somebody could just miss this and go down that really, really steep hill. Guardrails can be put on investments too, or inheritance, meaning you can keep people on the path by setting certain types of restrictions or safety nets, whatever you want to call them, and professionals know how to do that. So we don't have to go super deep, but I mean, to your point, there's ways to structure, create, systems, safety nets, all this stuff, because that's what we do every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we all get older, I think, we get a little wiser, I hope. But we, you and I are at a stage of our life where we're looking at our kids, possible grandkids. I've got some, I don't think you do yet. Or maybe that we haven't talked about that, but
some are kids, some are grandkids, some are here, some are there.
Right. And so we got, it's one of those things where we think more about the future than we did when we were 20. At 20 years old or 2 years old, I wasn't thinking about the future that much. Now I had a son at that point, so that's where I was focusing my attention, but I still wouldn't have probably made great decisions if I had gotten a lump of, money in my lap out of the blue at 22 years old. I wouldn't have invested it well at all. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I'm just thinking out loud to myself, would I have thought that was awesome to get a big pile of money at 22? Yeah. But I mean, looking back today, I'd say I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah. 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 Because it would have been unrealistic expectations of what the rest of my life would be like. Oh.
And honestly, if a huge pile of money fell in my lap today, if I struck oil in the backyard trying to plant a tree or something, I wouldn't even know who to call, first of all, for this oil gushing out. But secondly, I probably wouldn't blow any of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You get to a certain point in life, it's like, I don't really need stuff.
Yep. You need experiences.
Yeah.
And then that's the fun part, right? Plan all that stuff out. Plan things for your friends and family and do it in a way that's going to give them experiences and memories and stuff that they can talk about for years. Without blowing the entire budget in the first 2 months or 3 months. So,
yeah.
No.
And I mean, everybody should just, basically what it comes down to is everybody should be, literate or have financial literacy essentially to some extent. And if they don't have it, have people that can help you. And I'm not talking about investments necessarily. I mean, you just need to be literate when it comes to banking and credit cards and paying your bills, and so small steps in the right direction are progress.
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking that there are two groups of people that really need to reach out to you at this point about this podcast specifically. Those that know that they're going to be inheriting something, right? Whether it's a lot or a little bit. Even if it's a little bit, there's things that they can do. So people that know that they're going to be inheriting in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe putting some things in place that'll help them. And then those that know that they're going to be able to leave an inheritance. I think that's the other group that needs to kind of reach out and maybe find, a system or help, get some help creating a system for generational wealth, like you had said. I think those two are the groups, unless you've got another group in mind.
No, that's absolutely right. And the key to all of that is tax management. There's a lot of things we can do when people are still living to structure both of those scenarios from a smart tax standpoint. So yes, you're spot on.
All right. Well, let's give them that contact info.
Yeah. Give us a call here at the office, 800-657-4316.
All right, Corey, this has been fantastic. I'm hoping that people are listening and saying, you know what, I want to start this journey on the right foot, and they reach out to you. So I appreciate the contact info and, of course, the time today. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Definitely was. Looking forward to the next one.
All right, sounds good. And our last thank you, of course, goes to you, listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Win Podcast with Corey Heimensen. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Corey comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually does help others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Heimensen Wealth Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the WIN Podcast. What's important now? The show that helps you achieve your financial dreams. To ask questions about topics covered during the show or get a copy of Stop Doing Dumb Things with Your Money by Corey Heimensen, visit www.heimensenwealth.com or give us a call at 712-472-3867. Don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. Securities offered through Securities America Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Securities America Advisors Inc. Heimensen Wealth Advisors and Securities America are separate entities.